Before the Revolution, 1775 through 1789.
Here we are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1776. The time and place may seem familiar. This was the time and year that the Declaration of Independence was signed. Now you may be thinking, the Declaration of Independence was an American declaration to the British. What does that have to do with the French Revolution? What if I told you that this might have been the event that started the Revolution? In this city, this year, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed by the Founding Fathers. There was a lot of debate about this declaration, but ultimately it initiated a war between America and Britain. France decided to help with this war. Now, this wasn't a cheap investment. Transporting soldiers and ammunition was costly, especially in the 18th century. It cost £9 back then to move one person in the worst condition possible. You could fit, let's say, 400 people on one ship. That's 3,600 pounds in that time. Amp that up to current 2022 pound value, that would be 586,155 pounds. According to in2013dollars.com, that's $785,330 US as of January 30th, 2022 per 400 people. France sent 12,000 soldiers. That means they spent approximately $23,559,900 modern US dollars on soldiers for the American Revolution. With everything else, it totaled at about $1,757,908,100. That might have been part of the reason France went bankrupt not too long after. The French Revolution. The French economy was horrible. There was barely enough food to go around. The government was severely in debt. To make up for the significant debt, King Louis did what was expected. He established a land tax, or tax on property and buildings. This affected the upper classes quite a bit, which was risky. You didn't want to provoke the upper classes into trying to overthrow you. Then, on May 5th, 1789, King Louis called a meeting to discuss the problem. This meeting did not go as planned, I assume. This meeting, the Third Estate, everyone from peasants to the business class, declared itself the National Assembly. They demanded that everyone should have equal rights. I have a slight feeling they got that from the Americans across the Atlantic. That made things a lot trickier. Riots were breaking out all over the country. Everyone was worried that the king would try to fight back, and were arming up. But the big turning point hadn't hit yet. That hit on July 14th, 3 months from the meeting. Some of the French citizens decided to storm the Bastille, a large fortress meant to symbolize the power of the monarchy and to hold prisoners. The crowd seized control of some gunpowder stores, which killed the guards and freed the prisoners. The next month, the National Assembly drafted a document that technically left the king on the throne, but almost took all of his power. They then drafted a constitutional monarchy that made the king more of a figurehead than an actual person of power. Some of the people disagreed with that, instead wanting the king punished. That happened in April 1792. Some of the people who disagreed, with little debate, I might say, with the constitutional monarchy, stormed the royal palace and arrested the king and his family. That officially overthrew the monarchy. The National Assembly, renamed the National Convention, officially announced an end to the monarchy and tried to execute any revolutionaries who tried to make an end to their rule. The official records say that over the span of a year, they executed 17,000 people with the guillotine. But that number is estimated to be much higher, around 40,000. Things were disastrous. Tensions rising. The mood of the country was going downhill. Nasty revolts and riots were breaking out. The economy was not much better. The National Convention decided it would be a bad idea to leave all the power to one person, so they created a 2-branch legislature. France ultimately ended up being governed by a 5-person directory. It worked for a little bit, but no government can outlast political corruption. The directory was corrupt, and nobody liked it anyway. Then Napoleon got back from his conquests. Things got a lot more interesting. During the French Revolution, the Directory commissioned Napoleon Bonaparte to send a general to man soldiers and guard the legislature. On September 14th, under the command of one of Napoleon's generals, the soldiers led a coup in which they killed 130 of the counter-revolutionaries, or the people who were trying to stifle the revolutions against the Directory. That issued a crippling blow to the Directory, though the killing stroke hadn't hit yet. Day 1. The first thing that was done was some carefully placed rumors about a possible uprising. That increased suspicion and tension. Then, Napoleon gave a misleading speech on the Republic, intentionally leaving out support of the Constitution. Some of the other leaders of the revolution happened to be in the Directory. They resigned, bringing the 5-man Directory down to 3 people. The president of the Directory and another director suspected a trap and fled to Tuileries Palace, where they found none other than Napoleon and his resigned comrades. Napoleon asked the 2 members to resign, but they refused. Then, using the ruse of a different coup attack, Napoleon sent the director and 300 men to protect the 2 other directorate members, instead just imprisoning them. Meanwhile, some of the revolutionaries' pawns were patrolling the streets, watching for opposition from the Council of War. Barras, one of the other members of the Directorate, actually resigned quite quickly, with Talleyrand convincing him. Then, at around 7 p.m., the hardest part of the coup began. They needed to convince the Assembly to vote for a new constitution that would make the coup valid. Day 2. Today was going to be a big day. Today was the day that they would finish demolishing that much-hated government of theirs. Everything was looking good. There were a couple unseen problems, though. The first one, there were more Jacobins than expected. Jacobins were some people who had attempted a different coup before, but had much different ideals than Napoleon's goals. The tensions were rising so much, Napoleon kind of had a nervous breakdown. As he butchered his way through a speech, one of the members of the council decided to ask what Napoleon wanted to do with the Constitution. In a rage, Napoleon accused the council of breaking the Constitution multiple times, which was a valid point. Nobody really liked that. After a while, around 4 p.m., roll call was finished. The meeting had finally begun. After reading of Barras' resignation letter, things were getting tense. That energy was released when Napoleon's brother Lucien charged into the room with some armed grenadiers. Nobody really liked that, so they shouted their disapproval, most of them realizing that the coup was taking place. Napoleon was feeling discouraged due to his nasty speech earlier. That made him hesitate. His allies were the only people who saved him from that. The coup was looking like it would fail. Napoleon was almost in hysterics, which almost everyone else liked, because it just made it easier for them to denounce him. One thing saved the coup. It was when Lucien quite theatrically proclaimed, "I swear to plant a blade in the breast of my own brother if he ever violates the liberty of French." That got the soldiers excited and gave Napoleon enough time to compose himself. One of the revolutionary cavalrymen said a historic phrase, "Citizens, you have been dissolved. Get this effing rabble out of here." At that, everyone made a break for it. They ran out of almost every door in the room, and according to some legend, even out the windows. In the mayhem, someone went up on the podium and proposed a 3-member executive. Napoleon didn't like this very much, so they had to round up a couple hundred members of the 500 in order to counterbalance the proposal. The idea was aroused to thank Napoleon for cleansing the lower house. They eventually just decided to forget the last 2 days and the Directory. The final conclusion, with some debate I might imagine, was an executive commission with Napoleon Bonaparte, Abbé Sieyès, and one of the old revolutionary directors at the head. The Directory was gone. This coup was probably one of the most diplomatic events ever. One indicator of that is the fact that the total death count was 0. The planning and even the execution were highly debated. After his coup, Napoleon crowned himself emperor and ruled France for 16 years, 1799 through 1815. During his rule, he went to liberate the countries of Europe by taking control of them. While some were happy to have their leaders overthrown, that wasn't the case for everyone. While some of the things he did weren't great, for example, he restricted women's rights and reintroduced slavery, but he also improved France's legacy by ending the revolution and pushing for more land. The most significant event was probably him ending the revolution. You never know. Without him overthrowing the government, France could still be in the revolution today. And that's it for the Coup of Brumaire.